The snow lay heavy on the rooftops of Silver Hollow, muffling the world in a blanket of silence. Nestled at the edge of the Carpathian Mountains, this sleepy village rarely made the map, and those who lived there preferred it that way. Time passed slowly, like a river under ice. Seasons were measured not by calendar days, but by the way the light hit the mountains, or the sound the trees made in the wind. At the very edge of the village, tucked into the forest like a forgotten memory, stood a worn wooden cabin. And in that cabin lived Elias Rowan, a man many called a ghost long before he died. He had once been a ranger, a good one, the kind of man who spoke to animals with his eyes, and to people only when necessary. A tragedy years ago had carved out the soft parts of him, leaving behind a quiet, brittle shell. He'd lost his wife in an avalanche during a winter patrol. No body had ever been recovered. After that, Elias left the service, withdrew from the world, and moved into the mountains. Some said he was hiding from grief. Others believed he was waiting for it to find him. He never confirmed either. Every morning before dawn, he walked the forest paths with a thermos of coffee and a worn notebook. He rarely wrote in it. Mostly he just observed weather patterns, animal prints, broken branches. He lived simply. No internet, no visitors. Just firewood, books, and a faded photograph of a smiling woman holding a snow globe. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was early March, the kind of cold that clung to your bones. The wind howled through the pines and the sky was the color of lead. Elias had ventured farther than usual, past the ridge where trees grew crooked like twisted fingers. He was looking for signs of bear tracks. There had been rumors from the townspeople. But what he found instead was something entirely unexpected. A sound. Faint. Repetitive. Like a wet, broken breath. He followed it, ears tuned like they had been years ago when he was still patrolling with a radio and a badge. The sound led him to a thicket, half covered in snow. And there, caught in the cruel jaws of a rusted metal trap, was a young wolf. It was barely more than a juvenile, its fur a mixture of slate and silver, its frame lean, its eyes burning with panic. Blood stained the snow dark and angry, and steam rose from its body with each ragged exhale. Elias stood still. His first instinct was to walk away. It was dangerous, foolish even. Wolves were unpredictable. But the look in the animal's eyes pinned him in place. It wasn't fear of death he saw. It was something worse. Betrayal. The trap had likely been left by poachers, illegal ones who crossed the border at night to sell exotic furs. Elias had once helped track them. Now he felt the weight of their cruelty like a knife twisting in his gut. He whispered, "Damn them." The wolf let out a low, broken growl, not a threat, but a warning born of pain. Elias removed his backpack slowly and knelt, keeping his movements deliberate. He spoke softly, words that weren't meant to be understood, just heard. "I'm not here to hurt you." The trap was old but strong. It had bitten deep into the wolf's front leg, the metal teeth gnawing against bone. Elias knew there was no time to wait for help. The storm clouds were thickening, and if he didn't act fast, the animal would die. He wrapped his jacket around his hand and pushed down the release arms. The mechanism resisted. He cursed under his breath. The wolf snapped once, a weak, instinctive bite. But Elias didn't flinch. Finally, with one last effort, the trap clicked open. The wolf collapsed. For a moment, Elias thought it had died. But then its sides moved, shallow breaths returning. Blood pooled on the snow. Without thinking, Elias scooped it into his arms. Back at the cabin, the fire was already dying. Elias added wood with one hand, while holding the wolf against his chest with the other. He laid it near the hearth, placing a blanket beneath its body, and quickly fetched a small emergency kit he hadn't used in years. He cleaned the wound in silence. The wolf trembled, but it didn't growl again. Hours passed. Snow battered the windows. The wind moaned like a grieving widow. Elias sat on the floor next to the wolf, a cup of untouched coffee in his hand, staring at the rise and fall of its chest. He should have felt proud, or afraid, or cautious. But what he felt was known, as if he had waited years for this exact moment. He whispered, "Let's see if you're a fighter." The wolf didn't respond, but its ears twitched faintly at the sound of his voice. He named the wolf Kyle, an old name, once spoken in songs about frost and loyalty, not because it meant anything, but because it fit the silence between them. Kyle, a creature born of winter, and Elias, a man shaped by its sorrow. The days that followed were slow and fragile. Kale's condition remained critical. The wound had festered, an infection threatened to undo everything Elias had done. Twice Elias considered calling for help, walking into the village to find a vet. But something stopped him. Not pride, not fear, something deeper. A need to do this himself. He boiled herbs, sterilized his old ranger tools, and slept in a chair near the fire. He talked to Kale constantly, not with the expectation of answers, but as if speaking helped hold them both together. Had a dog once, he muttered one night. Golden retriever. His name was Birch. Didn't bite, didn't bark, just looked at you like he understood every damn thing. Kyle stirred but didn't open his eyes. You look like him, except more teeth. He smiled faintly. Outside, the wind howled through the pines. Inside, the crackle of the fire kept time. On the fifth day, Kale stood. His legs wobbled and he collapsed almost immediately. But it was a start. Elias knelt beside him, holding his weight, whispering, "That's it. One step at a time." From that moment, Kale improved rapidly. He ate little but regularly. He followed Elias's movements with cautious eyes. When Elias stepped out to chop firewood, Kale limped to the window and waited. Their bond was no longer survival, it was recognition. Two broken creatures who had chosen not to be alone. As spring approached, the snow began to melt. Streams cut through the ice like veins, and the air carried the scent of pine and thawing earth. Elias and Kale began taking walks, short at first, then longer. Kale limped beside him, no leash, no hesitation. The villagers, when they saw them at a distance, were awestruck. Some were afraid. Others whispered of legends, of old spirits taking the form of wolves to guard the mountain. Elias didn't care. He had Kale, and Kale had him. But even in peace, the past has a way of knocking. One afternoon, while organizing old boxes, Elias came across a faded journal. His wife's. Her handwriting slanted and smooth. The last entry had been written 2 days before her death. The storm worries me. Elias says it'll pass, but I see something in his eyes. He's trying to be brave. I miss his laughter. I miss the man he was before everything fell silent. He sat by the window, the journal in his hands, Kyle at his feet. I never told her goodbye, he whispered. Kyle nudged his arm softly. Elias looked down, blinking back the tears. Funny how I found you, huh? Or maybe you found me. Then came the day that nearly shattered everything. A late spring thunderstorm rolled in without warning. Elias and Cal were out near the northern cliffs, an area they rarely explored. The sky cracked with lightning, and the trail became mud. Suddenly, a deafening snap rang out. A massive pine, long dead and rotted from within, gave way and fell with a thunderous crash. Elias didn't move fast enough. The edge of the trunk caught his leg, pinning him to the ground. He cried out, a sound he hadn't made in years. Pain surged through him like fire. The sky screamed with wind and rain. Cal circled him, barking, panicking. Go! Elias rasped. Get help! But Kyle didn't move. Instead, he began digging, clawing at the earth, trying to dislodge the tree, to free Elias. Rain soaked his fur. Blood appeared at his paws from the effort. But he didn't stop, and Elias, through his pain, began to weep, not from the injury, but from the realization that Kale wouldn't abandon him. Not like the world had, not like he once had others. They remained there through the night. By morning, Kale was still digging. His paws were torn. His body shook from exhaustion. But he stayed. Eventually, a group of hikers found them, drawn by Kale's howling, relentless and echoing through the valley like a call for mercy. Elias was unconscious. Kale stood over him, teeth bared, growling at the strangers. Only when one of the hikers dropped to his knees and said, "We're here to help," did Kyle step aside. Elias awoke in the clinic, dazed and confused. The first thing he asked, "Where is he?" The nurse smiled. "Outside, hasn't moved since they brought you in. Won't eat, just waits." Elias turned his face to the window, and there, beneath a tree, lay Kyle, still, alert, his eyes fixed on the door. The following days unfolded not like time, but like breath, slow, shallow, and cautious. Elias barely left Cal's side. The young wolf's fever came in waves, his body shaking from the infection, his fur soaked with sweat. More than once, Elias found himself sitting up through the night, hand resting gently on Cal's ribcage, counting breaths like prayer beads. He fed him broth with a spoon, wiped his face, and whispered, "Don't go. Not you too." It had been years since he had spoken to anything with that much tenderness. The cabin, which had once felt like a tomb, began to stir with life. Logs burned brighter. The kettle steamed more often. The silence, once suffocating, now felt like shared space. Every little sign of Cal's improvement lit a spark in Elias. When his tail flicked for the first time in sleep, when his eyes opened and tracked Elias's movement, when he finally drank from a bowl of warm water. Each milestone was a miracle. On the 12th night, Kyle tried to stand. His paws trembled under his weight, and he collapsed with a soft grunt. Elias didn't help immediately. He watched, and then he whispered, "Try again." Cal did. This time he stayed up a few seconds longer. From that moment on, their days took on rhythm. Elias would open the cabin window in the morning, letting in the scent of pine and melting snow. Kyle, wrapped in a wool blanket, would sit nearby, head resting on his front paws. As the light warmed the floorboards, he would rise slowly and limp to the doorway, his eyes filled with quiet yearning. By late March, they ventured outside together, just to the edge of the porch at first, then to the clearing behind the cabin. Elias built a small wooden ramp so Cal wouldn't strain his injured leg. Step by step, paw by paw, the wolf began to reclaim his body. Elias often spoke during their short walks, not out of habit but hope. "You know, I was going to leave this place once," he told him one morning. "Right after she died, I packed everything. I stood right at the road." He chuckled bitterly. "Didn't even make it past the fence." Cal looked at him, not with comprehension, but with something deeper, presence. And that, Elias had come to understand, was enough. By early April, the forest began to bloom. Wildflowers peeked through the frost-bitten soil. Birds returned in clusters, their songs echoing through the trees. Elias and Kyle walked for hours some days, Kyle trotting beside him with a soft limp, stopping now and then to sniff at tree bark or chase a passing squirrel. To the townsfolk, they had become a myth. Children would run to their windows when they spotted them in the distance. The mountain man and his wolf. Elders whispered that Cal wasn't just a wolf, but a guardian spirit. Some said he was a creature born from Elias's grief, sent to return his heart. Elias neither confirmed nor denied any of it. He simply walked. Then came the night Elias found her journal. He hadn't meant to. He was clearing space near the bookshelf when a box tumbled from the top shelf, scattering papers and photo albums across the floor. There, among the debris, lay the leather-bound notebook with a pressed violet tucked between the pages. Anna's handwriting greeted him with curves so familiar it hurt. "The storm worries me. Elias says it'll pass. But I know him. I know that silence. I just hope the snow clears before he fades too." Elias read the entry again and again until the ink blurred through his tears. "I didn't fade," he whispered. "I just disappeared." Cal came to his side and laid his head gently in Elias's lap. He didn't move. He didn't demand. He just stayed. And Elias cried like he hadn't cried in a decade, until his body shook and his chest ached, and the pain finally loosened from his bones. As the weather turned warmer, their bond grew bolder. Kyle began bringing things back from the woods. Sticks, feathers, sometimes strange objects like a tin spoon or a length of old rope. Elias joked that he was trying to redecorate the cabin. They slept closer now. Sometimes Elias would wake in the middle of the night to find Cal's back pressed against his leg, breathing slow, deep, and steady. They had become two souls in one silence, but every piece invites a test. Late May. The day was warm, skies cloudless. Elias and Cal had ventured further than usual, up into the northern ridge trails near the cliffs, a place they hadn't explored in years. Wild goats dotted the slopes. The wind whispered in patterns only old trees understood. They stopped to rest near a fallen tree. Elias was adjusting Cale's bandage when he heard the sound. A groan, deep and awful. It was the sound of pressure giving way. A massive pine, rotted from within, buckled in the wind and collapsed. Elias barely turned before it struck. He screamed as the weight of the tree pinned his leg. A bone snapped. Pain exploded through him. The world tilted, blurred, narrowed. Kyle howled, sharp, panicked, desperate. Elias reached toward him, his voice a ragged whisper. "Go! Get help!" But Kyle didn't go. He stayed. He dug. With bloodied paws and frantic motions, he clawed at the mud and splinters trying to move the trunk. The storm came in fast, wind shrieking, rain slicing through the canopy. But Kyle didn't flinch. He howled into the wind again and again, calling out into the void. Elias drifted in and out of consciousness. In one lucid moment, he looked up at Cale, covered in mud, his sides heaving from exhaustion. "You stayed?" Kyle whined softly, then pressed his head to Elias's chest. They remained that way, man and beast, soaked in rain, frozen in pain, until morning. Weeks turned to months, and the forest became a second skin. Elias no longer walked with the slow, heavy tread of a man waiting for time to pass. He walked with intention, with Cale beside him, tail swaying low, steps quiet and in rhythm. They were no longer master and beast. They were a pack. And Elias began to laugh again. The first time it happened, it startled even him. Kyle had rolled in a patch of damp leaves, emerging with a crown of moss on his head and a stick comically sticking out of his mouth. Elias burst into laughter. Raw, real, the kind that warmed bones. Kyle tilted his head, confused at first. Then he barked softly, almost in response. From that day on, the air around the cabin changed. The villagers noticed. Children who once hid behind windows now waited near the path, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man and the wolf. An old woman left fresh bread near the gate. One of the rangers from Elias's past came by with medical supplies and didn't say a word, just placed them on the porch and left. They no longer feared Kyle. They admired him. He had become something more than wild, something sacred. But even sacred things carry shadows. One evening, Elias stood at the edge of the ravine, the very spot where Anna had vanished years ago. The snow had melted now, revealing the jagged rocks and black roots beneath. Cal stood beside him. Elias spoke aloud. "She's not here anymore, but I think I am." He took out Anna's journal again and gently placed it in the hollow of an old tree. It was her favorite one, the bark shaped like twisted lace, the branches reaching upward like a prayer. "She hated goodbyes," he said softly, "but maybe this is something else. Not an end, just a passing." Cale whined quietly, and Elias placed a hand on his thick fur. "You get that, don't you?" Kyle licked his fingers, then sat silently, as if honoring the moment. Around mid-May, something shifted. Kyle began to disappear during the day. Briefly, but enough for Elias to notice. He would return with dust on his coat or burrs in his tail, carrying the scent of deep forest. Elias understood. Nature was calling. Kyle's instincts, long dulled by pain and healing, were waking up. The pull of the wild, the need to hunt, to run, to be unchained, was returning. Elias felt torn. Every time Cal vanished, a cold edge scraped his ribs. And yet, when Cale returned, he always came to Elias first, nudging his leg, resting his head in his lap, sighing as if to say, "I'm still yours." But Elias knew better. He had once clipped wings, tried to hold on to things meant to fly. He would not do it again. One night, a low growl echoed near the cabin. Kyle stood instantly, ears alert. A dark silhouette moved between the trees, a lone male wolf, large, scarred, watching. Kyle didn't approach, neither did the stranger. They simply stared at one another, unmoving. Elias stepped outside, not to stop anything, but to understand. Kyle turned his head toward Elias, eyes flickering. Elias gave a slow nod. "It's okay," he said. "You don't owe me anything." The stranger melted back into the woods. Kyle did not follow. He stayed. Then the day before the accident, something strange happened. The forest went still. No birdsong, no wind. Even the river seemed to whisper more softly. Elias felt the weight of it, like nature was holding its breath. He turned to Kyle. "Do you feel that?" Kyle looked up at the sky and let out a single low whine. They stood like that for minutes, two creatures sensing something not yet spoken. And then came the storm, and the fall, and the pain. The world broke. The air fractured, but Kale remained. The morning after the storm, the village awoke to an eerie silence. A thick fog clung to the valley floor, swallowing sound and light. The mountains, usually so proud and sharp-edged, were softened into silhouettes. Nothing moved. Not the wind, not the trees. It was as if the earth itself had paused. But at the edge of the forest, Kale moved with purpose. His paws were raw, caked in blood and mud. His limbs shook from fatigue. But he stayed close to Elias, guiding the hikers step by step, never more than a breath away. When they reached the road, the ranger truck was already waiting. Elias was lifted onto a stretcher, unconscious but breathing. Kyle climbed into the vehicle beside him, uninvited, unchallenged. No one dared stop him. At the clinic, Elias lay still for 2 days. Machines beeped softly. Nurses came and went in hushed voices. Kyle waited outside the door like a sentry, unmoving. When Elias stirred in his sleep, Kyle's ears flicked. When Elias moaned, Kyle pressed his nose to the window. On the third night, Elias opened his eyes. "Kyle," the nurse smiled. "He's right there." Elias chuckled weakly. "Stubborn mutt," Kyle whined, then rested his head against the glass, eyes never blinking. The following weeks were gentle. Elias couldn't walk anymore. The doctors said the damage was permanent, but he didn't seem to mind. He asked to go home. The villagers helped. They built a ramp to the porch. They delivered firewood, food, clean linens. One child brought a drawing. Elias and Kale standing in the forest, surrounded by birds. "Is that me?" Elias asked. The boy nodded. "You're smiling." Elias looked at the drawing for a long time. Kyle remained close. When Elias sat on the porch, Kyle lay beside him. When Elias read, Kyle watched the pages turn. When Elias cried, Kyle leaned in, pressing his body gently against the man's side. No words were spoken. None were needed. They understood each other in a way that defied language. One evening, as the sun melted behind the ridgeline, Elias said, "You know, I don't think you saved me." Cal looked up. "I think you reminded me why I wanted to live." The wolf placed a paw gently on Elias's knee. Elias closed his eyes, whispering, "You're free now, Kale. If you want to go, I'll understand." Kale didn't move. That night the fire burned low. The stars blinked above, shy and scattered, and in the quiet breath between heartbeats, Elias exhaled and didn't inhale again. His face was peaceful. His hand rested gently against Kale's fur. They buried Elias beneath the old pine, where Anna's journal still rested inside the tree. The villagers gathered in silence, heads bowed. Kyle sat at the head of the grave, unmoving. When the priest spoke the final blessing, Kyle lifted his head and howled. Long, steady, filled with something ancient. A song of grief, a song of memory. After that day, Kale vanished. Weeks passed. Then one morning, just before sunrise, a woman from the village spotted something strange in the clearing near the grave. Footprints, one large, one smaller, side by side, always side by side. Some say Kale returns once a month, always at dawn. He sits by the grave. He does not howl. He does not move. He simply remembers. Elias's cabin remains empty, though the porch swing still creaks in the wind. The wildflowers have spread across the path, and sometimes travelers say they hear footsteps behind them in the forest. Soft, steady twin echoes moving together. Man and wolf, one in memory, one in life, bound not by words, but by a promise never broken. Dear listener, thank you for staying with us until the very end. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more tales of courage, connection, and quiet strength. Until next time.